My Govanen, this is the Tolkien Shed talking, and I have watched the episode 5 of The Rings of Power. And let me tell ya, if you think the circus is closed and we have seen everything from the clowns, then you are very much mistaken. Today's merry show is led by no other but the Dwarven king Durin III. The old monarch becomes absolutely and utterly psychotic. More on that under this timestamp, but there are many more clowns to laugh at, so make sure to watch the whole thing. Let's go! This week's misery starts as we see the old Dwarven king with the 7 rings. He takes one of them and we hear ominous voices so that we know that it is evil. He then goes to the miners who try to dig a passage so that the sunlight can enter the mountain once again. Guided by the ring, he points out a place where they should dig. We see his irritation as Durin protests, since the place is extremely risky to dig in. Soon it turns out that the irritation is a side effect of the fast-working ring. As nobody wants to take the risk, the king delves himself for a few hours, assisted only by his counsel Narvi and Durin. Then he breaks through the wall, opening the way for the sunlight. Then we see a sequence of scenes where the king points out the places where to dig. Then he delivers a triumphant speech, celebrating the return of the sunlight. The speech is great, except the part where it doesn't make sense, which is its entirety. The king says that the dwarves are not slaves to the sun like the people living overground, that they bring the sun to themselves. He seems to have forgotten that they were dying without the sunlight, sounds a whole lot like you depend on it, and that all the troubles with the sun that happen overground happen underground as well, even more so as you rely on its light falling under the right angle, on top of it being cloudy or just setting. So the dwarves are much more slaves to the sun than others. But go on, have your moment of greatness. No dwarf points out how stupid the speech is. The only group that is not happy is the stone singers, who are pretty much useless as the king can use the ring to do their job. So after this set of scenes, we know that King Durin can find places where to dig, thanks to the ring. He's irritable, but we knew that already. He's risk-taking and doesn't know how the sun works. And Dissa, she's jealous of the power of the Ring of Power. Then we teleport to a region where dwarves and elves celebrate their cooperation. On this occasion, Narvi presents his project, which he had so much time to make when he was working on clearing the sunshafts. The project is the new gate to Khazad-dûm, visible only in the moonlight, guarded by a password. This, of course, is the Gate of Moria we see in the Fellowship of the Ring. Annatar is not so joyful as the rest of the company. When he and Celebrimbor speak, he says that he is troubled by the suffering caused by the rise of Mordor. By that, Celebrimbor is reminded of the rings for men which he was asked to create. When he asks Annatar if that's what he meant, he says that he didn't exactly say so, and Celebrimbor points out that he is a notorious manipulator who puts ideas into others' minds so that they seem as their own. So basically, he accuses this messenger of the Valar of being ingenuine and manipulative, but he doesn't stop to think if this is in any way suspicious and a cause for concern. Then we hear that Celebrimbor doesn't believe that men can be trusted with the rings as they are too easy to be corrupted. But then Annatar recalls the names of the great heroes of men, stating that they are also capable of greatness. He proposes that they seek the wisest and the purest men and give the rings to them. This seemingly makes the idea grow on Celebrimbor a bit. Annatar says that they will create 9 rings. Celebrimbor asks why 9, and the answer is because it is 3 multiplied by 3. Remind me, why was it that the number 3 was so good?
1 will always corrupt. 2 will divide.
But with 3 there is balance.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't. But if the number 3 is so great, why did you make 7 rings for the dwarves? Anyway, Celebrimbor says that he won't make the 9, and Annatar says, fine, I'll make them myself. As we see later, Celebrimbor is still against the idea, but he doesn't stop Annatar and allows him to make use of his forge and his smiths. It seems as if an entire conversation is missing, and the whole argument should last longer, which makes the first instance of this week's edition of We Cut Away Before an Important Conversation Finishes. And that's certainly not the last example. Alright, so now we know that Celebrimbor is aware that Annatar manipulates him, he doesn't trust men, and he doesn't execute his will. And Sauron, he needs Celebrimbor, but at the same time he ignores him and his orders, but despite this curious strategy, he still achieves his goals, as we'll learn later. We then move to Númenor, where Pharazôn, now a king, talks to his son Kemen.
They discuss the fact that only the keenest of the Númenóreans can see a glimpse of Valinor from their highest mountain. Pharazôn sees it as a mockery, a reminder of the human mortality in face of the elves' immortality. This here is the very first true remark on the whole conflict between Númenóreans and the elves, the first and so far the only mention of the Númenórean envy, which, in the books and as I assume in the creators of the show minds, is the reason for Númenor's downfall. As much as I am glad it is finally here, it is far too late. We are past over the half of Season 2, and this major characteristic of the Númenórean politics and thought appears here for the first time. We spent hours in Númenor, but the only other mention of that jealousy can be drawn from the people fearing that the elves will take their jabs, which is a sin that I cannot take seriously. Kemen tries to convince his father that he already achieved much and should focus on making the Númenor of his dreams. Pharazôn responds by saying that Kemen's mother prophesied that her son would come to an ill end. When Kemen asks for more details, Pharazôn uses it as a leverage to force him to do what he wants him to do, and that is fight the faithful. I believe that there are other ways of asking your son for a favor, but you do you, Pharazôn. In a different part of Númenor, we see Miriel and Elendil in a tower. Elendil says that there are still people that support Miriel, most notably the Sea Guard. By the way, as the only other military force in Númenor is the Royal Guard, and there don't seem to be many of them, the military takeover would be quite easy. But Miriel doesn't want to start a civil war. She asks what did Elendil see in the Palantir when he touched it. He says that he saw himself riding somewhere, and to the Queen it means that the fate of Númenor has changed, as the only thing she saw throughout the years was the fall of Númenor. For that reason she believes that Pharazôn should remain on the throne and that Elendil has a role to play. She orders him to stay calm and to keep Númenor on the new path. There is only one slight problem. She doesn't know what the new path is, beyond the fact that Pharazôn should be ruling, and even that isn't certain. So basically, she gives no meaningful instruction to Elendil. How can he be sure about anything he does? There is no way that he can know if he is helping or harming the situation. Also, there is no guarantee that the fate of Númenor has in fact changed. The vision showed Elendil so little that it could mean anything. It could be a scene of the fall of Númenor, just limited to him. There's simply far too little information to do anything with certainty, but the characters are oblivious to that. Then we see the men of the Sea Guard giving up their gear. Valandil is among them, and he informs Elendil that all those that were loyal to the Queen are stripped of their rank. It turns out that it wasn't directly on the King's orders, but on Arian's. Why exactly is she, an architect guild apprentice, in charge of the Sea Guard? I get that she took part in the coup and earned herself a position, but why in the Sea Guard? Shouldn't she be the chief architect or something, making some monuments for kings? Oh wait, she already did that. She was allowed to make the sculpture of the dying king after a week in the academy, and now as she was already on top of the architect's career ladder, she jumped over onto the Sea Guard ladder? I don't know, it seems extremely illogical. Then she and Elendil have a chat. She says that a large part of the Sea Guard was about to be charged with treason. The suggestion is that she asked for them to be pardoned, so instead they were forced to leave the guard. It also seems that she expected her father to thank her, but instead he points out that she earned her position thanks to overthrowing the rightful ruler. She answers that she did that because of her grief after Isildur, and that Pharazôn is the rightful king now. They warn each other about the dangers of their choices, and so the conversation ends. Then Elendil gives up his sword, and his men salute him, while Kemen tries to silence them by saying that he is not their captain anymore, but to no avail. A short while later, Arianne tells Valandil that she can take him off the list of the men that fell from grace because of their old friendship. But Valandil tells her that she already showed who her true friends are and goes forth to give up his gear as well. Those two last bits do work. Valandil's pride and honor don't allow him to be given a position out of pity. And we see that Elendil has much respect in the Sea Guard and that he is a true leader of his people regardless of his rank. Those are good elements. A shame that they are so lonely. Now, before we change the scenery, we also see Pharazôn considering looking into the Palantir. Well. Now we know that Pharazôn has a new title, the King of Númenor, and that he is jealous of the elves' immortality. He is also a hypocrite for using the Palantir. Now, Kemen. He is not as ambitious as his father, he is prophesied to come to an ill end, and he is not respected. Then Miriel. She blindly trusts the Palantir,
but to be honest, doesn't she do everything blindly now? And she doesn't want to fight Pharazôn. Elendil, on the other hand, is ready to start a civil war, and he is much respected by his men. Now Eärien. She gains a new alias, the commander of the Sea Guard. We learn that she grieves for Isildur, and she is dishonorable. Finally, Valandil. He is principled, honorable, proud, and honest.
Then we see Gil-galad reading a letter from Celebrimbor in which he informs him that the forge is not working anymore. Now a question arises: how did the messenger manage to reach Lindon without fighting the Barrow-wights? Or did he for some reason go the longer way? But in order to have any reason to do that, he would have to know that the shorter way, shorter by about 2 weeks on foot, it is very much, is dangerous, and that an ancient evil dwells now in the Barrow Downs. And he clearly cannot know that without a script-reading ring or another script-reading technique. So the most plausible explanation, and it is not plausible at all, is that he went the shorter way, didn't bump into Elrond and his companions somehow, and he was left alone by the Whites because they somehow knew that he is useful to Sauron's plans. If that's not absurd, I don't know what is. Oh, wait, the scene actually goes on, so there might be more insanity ahead. So, based on the new information, Gil-galad is encouraged by his commanders to send an army to Mordor, as all is well in Eregion. Oh yeah, another insanity. Didn't take you long at all. What do I mean? Celebrimbor writes that he closed the forge on King's orders. This is unbelievably suspicious, because the King never ordered him to do that. Also, there is no mention of Sauron in the letter. So, the exchange looks somewhat like, Celebrimbor, listen, the man who helped you create the rings is your worst enemy, evil incarnate Sauron himself. And Celebrimbor's answer is, yeah, I closed the forge as you asked. Cool thing the rings worked, isn't it? As Gil-galad failed to notice that something was wrong, we must assume that he is as fit to rule as Amazon's Galadriel is a lovable character. Then we see a short scene of Elrond and his companions running to deliver the news to Lindon. Do I need to say it? Do I? Really? No, in fact I don't. But I'll do it anyway. Where is your bloody horse, Elrond? Maybe should have thought about that before, eh? Also, all his companions ran with him. So nobody was dispatched to bring the news to Celebrimbor? Of course. What else did we expect?
Alright, so now King Gil-galad, he joins the ranks of the clowns of the show, as he forgot his own orders and is blind to the obvious truth. And now Elrond, he forgot about Celebrimbor.
Then we see Disa talking to Durin. She is bitter about the whole situation with the ring. She feels as if using it to deal with their problems instead of using the long-studied technique of stone singing is like cheating, that it is too easy. Then they go to the market and Disa chooses a stone to buy for her daughter, and when Durin hears the price, he is shocked. He then hears about so-called ring tribute. For every coin spent, one goes to the crown. A 100% value-added tax. I am no economist, but this is utterly absurd. Hungary has the highest VIT in the world, and it is 27%. I know we are supposed to see that the king has suddenly become greedy, but that's something a child would make up to show that. A simple new tax without giving any rate would be enough to notice. But no, in order to make a point, the show made the king even more insane than he was before. He started by forbidding trade with the outsiders, and now he introduces a new tax which basically doubles the prices of all goods in the entire kingdom. Imagine what would happen if you woke up one day and saw that the prices doubled overnight. This would put the entire economy in chaos. This would ruin basically everybody. The new tax is downright insane, but we are used to that already, I guess. Anyway, in the next scene we see a revolution started by the dwarves who cannot live under such tyrannous taxes. Soon the furious mob comes to the king's palace to overthrow him and put in his place somebody else. Hello, sorry, do you hear me? Yeah, we appear to have had some intermission with an alternate universe, can you believe it? Fortunately, before we disconnected, I had the chance to take a quick look at the version of the Rings of Power. It appears that in their universe they actually hired a 12-year-old, and what you heard about the revolution was of his making. So, I must admit that I was mistaken. Even a child understands the basics of world building better than the writers in our universe. He knows, for example, that people don't like their prices raising twofold overnight, and that no sane ruler would ever institute a tax that would lead to such an outcome. By the way, he also wrote it so that elves use horses in episode 4. Oh man, I wish we had that kid here. Anyway, good on him, but we must go back to a sad reality where the tax is not mentioned ever again. Disa and the rock seller haggle a bit, Durin pays the price, and promptly disappears from the scene. Disa takes the rock, but she is pushed by someone, drops it, and follows it into a system of caverns into a cave she hasn't seen before. Then, in the shadows, she hears a giant creature roaring. Let's rewind a bit. When did we leave the market? In other words, why is there an uncharted system of caverns just beside the market that nobody knows about? Also, how did the stone roll so far in a terrain that is most certainly not smooth? And of course, how lucky is Disa to have lost a rock that so conveniently led her to a place that will certainly be used for plot later? I am almost sure that this creature is Balrog. So, if Disa didn't drop the rock, and if it didn't roll away so conveniently into a cavern that nobody at this market, or the whole kingdom it would seem, knew about, she wouldn't have heard Balrog singing in the shower, and wouldn't have learned that some creature is occupying their underground bathroom. Isn't it great when significant plot points just materialize out of sheer luck? Then we see the emissaries of 7 dwarven kingdoms who have arrived in Moria before the Old King. I know that asking about the passage of time is pretty much redundant, we won't get an answer, but I gotta do it. When did those dwarves from all around the world manage to come here? Also, we only see 6 people each representing one kingdom, the Old King included. Where is the 7th one? I know that counting is hard, but to 7? Come on, Amazon. Anyway, the Old King says that the Dwarf Lords may have the other rings, but for a price. They should, of course, laugh it off, because they have no troubles that could be helped by the rings, and the King's ramblings about the danger that comes to Middle-earth shouldn't bother them. But of course not. Instead they don't speak even a word. We literally have not even a word that would describe the situation in the other dwarven kingdoms. We don't even know where those kingdoms are located. Actually, you know what? Here's a conspiracy theory. I don't think they exist at all. It is all fake. The 7 kingdoms are a lie by the show writers to make us think that this is a functional wide world. But they won't fool me. Then apparently the emissaries leave to inform their non-existent leaders about the king's offer. Meanwhile, the Old King orders to dig for gold and overrides the restrictions he set in the past. Yeah, we get it. He's big greedy now. Don't have to beat me on the head with a shovel to show me that. What's also important, we see the king being paranoid about the ring. As soon as he notices that it isn't on his finger, he immediately suspects that somebody has stolen it. It turns out that he simply forgot that he took it off. Alright, now a quick detour to summarize the changes in the king's behavior. They are almost instantaneous, which leaves no place for subtlety. I decided to call it Rapid Onset Gollumicity, as the one ring corrupted Gollum for centuries, and King Durin's ring corrupted him for about a day or two, and the two of them are in pretty much the same state. Also, to the list of King's mental illnesses, we should add Rapid Onset Insanity, because he clearly cannot make logical decisions anymore, he destroys the economy of his kingdom, and doesn't listen to his advisors. From the first season, we may remember him as a cautious character who ordered to close the mithril mines as they were dangerous or didn't trust the elves. Now, he's just reckless. And there is no state in between. It just happened overnight. Now, back to the scene. Durin comes in bringing the news that Disa heard a beast in the mines. But the king ignores it. He says that with his ring he can see every treasure in the mountain and that Disa is mistaken. And that's it. The scene ends. Remember the name of the game. We cut away before an important conversation finishes. Durin doesn't argue, doesn't point out that the king has gone insane, we just cut away. Alright, so now, King Durin. You could say that he lacks character exploration, but in fact, at this stage no conversation could explain his decisions. He became a puppet in the hands of the writers. He's no longer a real character, he's a puppet clown. Say goodbye to King Durin III. This here is King Durin the Puppet. He doesn't understand taxes, he's extremely greedy, he suffers from rapid onset gollumicity, rapid onset insanity, paranoia, he's reckless, he's also very greedy, and can see every treasure in the mountain thanks to the ring. Now Disa. She is clumsy and very lucky. Alright, that would be it. Hey, what you doing?
Meta jokes are not allowed!
Then we see a series of strange events during the forging of new rings, and it turns out that the elves have managed to make a ring that makes the user invisible. The elf that for some undiscernible reason put it on started fooling around, throwing things, dropping down the anvil, generally wreaking havoc. We never learn exactly why she behaved that way, but let's go through that chronologically. Celebrimbor helps her to take the ring off, and then she says that it allowed her to peek into the unseen world and to notice a being in flames, a being both evil and eternal. And she believes that it is still among them. Of course, we viewers know that she saw Sauron in his more menacing form. She is understandably terrified, but then Annatar says that everything is alright and she, together with a whole bunch of elves, simply forgets what happened for a while and other elves never mention it again. She then goes on to explain what procedure was used in the making of this invisibility ring. During her speech, Celebrimbor cuts in with some remarks, but then stops himself from revealing anything more. But then Annatar asks him to share his knowledge to avoid further mistakes and dangerous situations in the future. Let's pause for a moment and point out that the difference between Celebrimbor's and Sauron's smithing abilities is quite inconsistent. In Season 1, it was Halbrand that introduced Celebrimbor to the idea of alloys, but now Annatar doesn't know the answer to their current problem and requires Celebrimbor's assistance. Anyway, Celebrimbor almost reveals the correct formula, but then he is notified of the arrival of Durin and goes to meet him. It turns out that Durin came because he is concerned about his father, his growing greed and insane policies. Apparently, the old king agreed to give the remaining rings to other dwarf lords, but only in exchange for half of the riches from their mines. Half their income. Again, there's a difference between greed and cartoonish stupidity, but Amazon doesn't seem to know it. Durin suspects that it was the ring that made his father a fool, but Celebrimbor refuses to accept that there is a fault in the rings he created. He states that everything was the same in the process of creating the 7 and the 3, and as the 3 elven rings are flawless, the 7 dwarven ones should be flawless as well. But Durin proposes that it is Annatar who is responsible for the corruptive nature of his father's ring. And lo and behold, it is the first time when Celebrimbor starts doubting Annatar's character. I will stop myself from pointing out all the red flags he should have noticed long time ago. Instead, let's take a look at Sauron's plan. If the dwarven rings, or rather the one ring they are currently using, is working according to his designs, then we have to assume that for some reason he wanted to make it abundantly clear that the rings are corruptive, or he is very naive in thinking that nobody would notice. But still, compared to the fact that he went to Mordor for no reason and came back losing a whole lot of precious time, what is yet another insane decision in the grand scheme of things. Speaking of Annatar, we see him talking to the elf that put on the invisibility ring. He tries to convince her that the figure she saw was Celebrimbor, which is a very peculiar lie. Instead of trying to convince her that Celebrimbor is partially corrupted by shadow after the effort of making the rings, he could have said that the vision is unclear, that she maybe saw the growing shadow of Mordor, or something else, but he tries to convince her that her boss is evil, or at least becoming evil. But you do you, Sauron.
Alright, so now we know that Celebrimbor cares for the Smiths and forgets important information just as the rest of the Smiths. Now Durin cares for his father and sees through Annatar. King Durin the Puppet is greedy, and Sauron makes convoluted lies instead of easy ones.
Then we go back to Númenor and see a religious ritual for the dead. There's a priest, Valandil, Elendil, and other people belonging to the faithful. The ceremony is interrupted by Kemen and his guards. Kemen says that the shrine is condemned by the king and further disrespects the ritual, so Elendil arranges a meeting between his own fist and Kemen's face. As he is being arrested, Valandil attacks Kemen as well. For that scene, the gods forget what they are supposed to do. They are busy elsewhere, at least they pretend to be. Some just stand there and do nothing, even though the king's son is at the brink of death. You have a great shot of that here. And all of that in order to have a little bit of drama. Undisrupted by the gods, Valandil has an opportunity to strike Kemen with a sword, but Elendil orders him not to do it. Valandil listens to the order, turns his back to Kemen, and then he is pierced by the very sword he held a moment ago. Rest in peace, Valandil. Though barely present, you were the only character except the dwarves who had some reason and competence. You weren't far from being my favorite. A shame. Well, Beric still holds the first place.
Alright, not much more to say about the scene, except that Kemen choosing to persecute the official religion of Numenor, you may remember that this priest was the one leading the ceremony of Muriel's coronation, seems like a very bad idea to help his father strengthen his rule over the kingdom. Alright, so what do we have here? Kemen, he cannot understand the consequences of his actions, he is cruel, dishonorable, and he is a murderer. Elendil has boundaries he doesn't allow others to cross, and he is merciful, and Valandil, he is also merciful, and well, unfortunately, dead. Then we see Annatar trying to convince Celebrimbor that there is nothing wrong with the rings. But Celebrimbor is not having it. He asks if Annatar altered the dwarven rings. His answer is that they both did. That because of them lying to Gil-galad, their spirits weren't pure enough and influenced the rings. I mean, cool story, bro. Now tell me the truth. But nah, Celebrimbor buys it. And according to Annatar, the only way to mend this evil is to go to the king and to confess to what he did. I'm sorry, how will that help anything? The rings are already corrupted. Would they stop being that way if Celebrimbor admitted that he lied? Also, if Celebrimbor believes that the 7 rings are corrupted, he should aim to make new ones. But he never even considers that. And just you wait for the solution that he comes up with. It is something special. Then we move to Khazad-dûm, where we see Durin trying to reason with his father to convince him that the ring is corrupting him. But then the king says that Durin's advice to treat with the elves was wise and that he is proud of him. He then restores him to graces as his heir. In response, we cut away before an important conversation finishes. Durin should further try to convince his father not to use the ring, but why do that if we can just cut away? As Durin talks to Lisa later, he just says that he couldn't convince his father. What a shame. She demands that he promises to never wear one of the rings. He does so without hesitation. And that's it for the dwarves in this episode. Then we are back in Eregion and we see Celebrimbor who gathered his smiths. He says that they weren't diligent enough in making the 7, that they weren't doing everything to absolute perfection, and that they must redeem themselves by forging the 9 together. How will that help the 7 exactly? And what guarantee do you have that the 9 won't be corrupted as well? Making the 7 anew would be a logical option, together with making sure that Annatar isn't around and checking if that changes the outcome. But if Celebrimbor believes that it is his lie and treachery that caused the corruption of the 7, not changing anything means that he just lost his mind and is literally insane, as insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Alright, after these few scenes, we can safely conclude that Celebrimbor is a clown, as he forgets the reason for the ring's corruption and makes the 9 anyway. He's just insane. And we can also add from earlier that Durin promises to never wear one of the rings. Then we cut to Elrond, who has come to Lindon now. He brings the news to Gil-galad, but the king doesn't seem moved by the information that Adda's armies are near Eregion, and before he hears about the numbers, position or movements of the enemy, he states that defeating the orcs will not be possible because he believes that Sauron is behind all of this, and they cannot defeat both him and Adda. They need help. I'm sorry, but what even is that? You currently know nothing about your enemy. Listen to Elrond, compare numbers, make plans. But I suppose you know what happens next. Of course, it's your favorite. We cut away before an important conversation finishes. So we learn nothing about the king's reasoning or who he wants to call for help, and we simply don't see what Elrond does after the king's statement. Alright, so now we know that Gil-galad doesn't want to learn vital information and makes unsubstantiated decisions. Then we see Galadriel in a cage in the orcs' camp, and if that sight ain't satisfying, I don't know what is. Adar informs her that he sees her as a potential ally against Sauron. Doesn't he believe that she might be in league with him? Also, now that we have all the information we need, we may ask, how did Adar manage to come to Eregion unnoticed? Remember how far it is from Mordor? He had to travel all that distance with a whole army and nobody noticed him? Not even one spy? We know that elves keep watch over these lands, they managed to track Halbrand, but they missed an entire army? Not only is Gil-galad none the wiser, but Celebrimbor and all the elves from Eregion didn't notice anything either. Really?
Nobody saw this giant army entering the country? Is your border control so weak? Also, what even is Adar doing here? Wasn't he supposed to wait for news from Halbrand? What changed? Wanna bet we'll never learn?
Alrighty, after this final scene we know that Adar is ready to fight alongside an elf against Sauron, he can teleport his armies, and forgets his plans. And yeah, that concludes the episode. Alright, let's summarize this disaster. In the Dwarves storyline, the king becomes absolutely bonkers and destroys the economy of his kingdom while making irrational demands of other dwarven lords. Other than that, he reinstitutes Durin as his heir. Meanwhile, Disa discovers a beast in the depths of the mines by a sheer stroke of an insane luck. In Eregion, Celebrimbor becomes suspicious of Annatar, but he isn't allowed to act on it, and despite his doubts, and despite the fact that Annatar clearly defied his will, he still allows him to work on the rings. Then, despite believing that it was his deception that corrupted the artifacts and that it still can affect them, he decides to make the 9 rings for men anyway. In Númenor, the queen decides to let Pharazôn rule because of an unclear vision. Then Eärien and Kemen purge the Sea Guard of the queen's supporters, and we get the 2 good scenes. Then Kemen persecutes the faithful and fights against the main religious group in the kingdom. He almost dies because Númenorian guards are Númenorian guards, they wouldn't be able to save a dragon from a damsel in distress. But in the end, it's Valandil who dies and Elendil is arrested. Finally, we learn that Elrond learned nothing and still doesn't use a horse. He also forgets that Celebrimbor could make use of the information that he is working with the Dark Lords himself. Still, Elrond running back to Gil-galad is futile, as the king is yet another clown. Not only does he fail to realize that Celebrimbor never received his letter and is being fed false information by someone, he also decides against going to Eregion for no logical reason. So, how many clowns do we have already? King Durin, Celebrimbor, Gil-galad, Elrond, Galadriel? Amazon, don't make a real-life show, you are much better suited for making silly cartoons. And well, honestly, I've just insulted a great deal of cartoons. Alright, so there you have the review. Now, in the last video I told you that I will be releasing those less frequently than one a week, and now I can safely say that the time between each review will be about 2 weeks, if not more. So, still a lot of time I will spend on the series, and that's not even counting the final installment, and that is the whole Season 2 analysis, which will be probably longer than any video on this channel. So yeah, a whole lot of work to do, but I still find it enjoyable, even if tiring, so you can expect me to release the whole bloody series at some time in the future. And yeah, that's it for now. I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well, Nova Year.
And that no sane ruler would ever institute a tax that would lead to such an outcome.
Then Kemen persecutes the faithful and fights against the main group of the...
We also see his irritation as during protests. Kemen tries to silence them by saying that he is not a Factin anymore. Where is your bloody horse, Elrond? Maybe should have thought about that before, eh? Yes, I am Canadian now. Deal with it.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.